way. Live transcript, enable. All right.
Oh, wow. Large live transcript.
Yeah. Well, mostly to save myself some work after the fact, right? So I don't have to transcribe it raw. Okay, so this is a guided interview. Part of it is scripted, so there's parts of it I'm going to be reading off of the sheet, but the intent really is for it to be as organic of a conversation as possible. So, we good to go? Yes? Excellent. So thank you so much for joining me today in this one-on-one interview. As you know, the aim of this interview is to hear more about your experiences within the domains of equity, diversity, and inclusivity. Your participation in this interview is voluntary, and if at any point you would like to step out, take a break, pause, or end early, just let me know. You're welcome to do so. These interviews, as you know, will be recorded for transcripts to be generated, but they will be anonymized. So if any names are stated, they won't be carried through. There won't be identifiers kept. So do I have your consent to start?
You do. Yep.
Thank you. Before we actually get started, do you have any questions for me?
Nope.
Beautiful. So for the record, can you please state your age, your gender, and your role at the Cancer Center presently?
Age is 40, gender is male, and role at the Cancer Center is resident radiation oncology.
Thank you. So the first question, I essentially ask you to define or explain 3 terms. So we'll go through those sequentially. So if you were asked, how would you define or explain the term equity to someone?
Equity, I think, is equal access to resources, regardless of individual capabilities.
Okay. And then how would you define or explain the term diversity?
Within a subgroup, having a variety of choices or experiences.
When you say choices, what do you mean?
I don't know, because diversity can apply to people, can apply to things, diversity applies to a lot of things, right? So diversity to me means within a bin of a given subgroup, or within a subgroup having a heterogeneous selection.
Okay. And then how would you define or explain the term inclusivity?
Inclusivity, regardless of individual capability, having equal access to resources.
Okay. So keeping those ideas, those themes, those definitions in mind, do you see these domains influencing the patient-clinician relationship or the patient-clinician interaction? And if so, in what ways?
So diversity, inclusivity,
and equity.
And what was the first one? And equity.
Mm-hmm.
So influencing physician and patient. Okay. So inclusivity, diversity.
Essentially, like, does it matter, and if it does, in what way?
Okay. So I don't think, so I think there's unequal access to physician and healthcare based on different factors in our current society. Even though healthcare is free for all, we have differential access depending on where you live, depending on rural versus urban, depending on kind of your ability to seek out care.
Mm-hmm. So do you have examples of
give
that?
Me some more. Give me some prompts. Sure. Some examples. Despite having, if you look at physician per 100,000 people, that sort of thing, or per 10,000 people, that number is not equal across the board, across Canada. So in terms of family physician, in terms of access to subspecialty services, the number of family physicians, the number of subspecialists per 10,000 per 100,000 people across Canada is not equal. So that's one access issue. I guess that's not, I don't know if that's equity or what. So that's one thought. So for example, people in northern communities don't have the same access to physicians and subspecialties as people in urban communities. Give me some more prompts. Give me some more stuff that you're looking for with this.
So I guess the question is, so you've talked on like unequitable access to care.
Someone's freezing.
Oh, I think it might be me. Hold on. This give me 1 quick second.
Turn on my camera. I can't hear anything. I can't see anything.
No, it's me. Okay. Give me 2 seconds. I may go away and then immediately come back. Hold on. And we're back.
Okay.
We'll just put the transcript back on. Label. And let's read that again. The transcript enable. There we go.
So I don't know where my rambling ended. I'm just saying unequal access across Canada to family physician subspecialties based on geographic location, and geographic location can sometimes be based on economic status. It can be sometimes based on culture or background. So I think those things all go together.
Yeah, no. And so in terms of inequity, that's certainly a very poignant point. But like, for example, if we were to explore the other domains, are there times when, diversity of the individual in their, personhood or their identities can play a role in the manner in which they get care from physicians, or in the manner in which they interact with physicians or are heard by them?
Mm-hmm. I can appreciate that. So my partner is a resident in Winnipeg, and Winnipeg has a large First Nations community, and she says that a lot of times the First Nations people come and seek medical care. She's neuro, so after this trope has been evolving for a long time, and they're outside of the window because for a number of reasons, which I don't know, right? I don't know their reasons for not seeking healthcare, but I think some of these that might contribute, that answer your question, or maybe there's a lack of physicians or healthcare providers who they can relate to, right? Mm-hmm. There could be language barriers for not just speaking about First Nations people. And then in terms of diversity, I can appreciate for new Canadians, it can be sometimes hard to go into a place where you don't speak the language, you don't recognize the people, and feel comfortable having intimate conversations with people who, for lack of a better term, are not like you, or you're not familiar with them, or I can only imagine trying to seek healthcare in a place where you don't speak the language, right? So I think that those are the initial thoughts.
So, I mean, looking more introspectively or in your own personal experiences, have you been a part of an encounter where your ability to connect with a patient was influenced by these domains at the cancer center? So whether it was in terms of their decision making, establishing trust with them, breaking bad news, like when you had to, or in reflection, be conscientious that these sort of aspects of care really played a role.
Um, I think anytime we have to, with any interaction, I think we have to go through a translator is always a challenge for me. Establishing rapport and having good conversations or having comfortable conversations is very important to me in my practice. And I think when we have to go through a translator, some of that kind of person to person contact gets lost, which that's just my own bias in my own practice. Other challenging issues, we all carry our biases with us wherever we go and whatever we do. So I think, sometimes people come in with their own bias that doesn't match with my bias, right? What they think, I'm biased to treating cancer with radiation and they're biased to seeking some other sort of care or not agreeing with that. So I think, the lens with which we all look at the world, somebody's just knocking at the door. Hold on. Hello. Oh, okay. Thank you. You too. Thanks. Okay. I'm just saying, like, sometimes the biases that we all carry sometimes, and those biases are formed by lots of things. Biases are formed by background, language, by culture, and I don't know that that's frustrating. I'm just saying sometimes my opinions and the people we work with's opinions are different because of these sort of areas, and sometimes that's a challenge for me. But I just accept that they have their own view and they have their own goals. What can you give me some more prompts, or what else do you want out of this question?
Well, so I know that you mentioned in the first one, like the translator piece and how it can feel like that connection that you often need with patients is a bit more halted or disconnected. What are some strategies that you've tried to employ to bridge that gap? Or, what are some emotions that you feel in those moments? Like, do you have an anecdote where you felt like, oh, like I don't know if they quite got it, or I don't know that they fully click with me?
So I like to encourage family members. I know we're supposed to go through the translation services, or that's what's recommended for us. I find in my experience anecdotally that I've had better success at establishing rapport, having family translating versus using the translation services. I don't know why. That's probably my own bias. Talking about bias, I have no data for that. I'm just saying it feels more comfortable when I have a family member there. In terms of anecdotes, can you give me that prompt one more time?
So the idea being that because the translation needed to happen, that you either felt like there was dissonance in the message that you were trying to convey versus what they received, or whether you felt like it caused a gap in the rapport you were trying to establish.
Yes, I think there's a gap in the rapport just because of the, if nothing else, the time delay, right? Speak, interpret, translate, speak, interpret, translate sort of thing. That's always a bit of a gap, and it kind of stalls the natural flow of a conversation, which, is par for the course. And, tonality, in voice isn't, is essentially erased when you go through a translator, right? So, having gentle tone, having reassuring tone, I think that sometimes gets lost, but it's more important that the message gets conveyed. So I can appreciate the importance of using translators.
Are there any specific skills that you've adapted in those circumstances, right? Like anything that over years you found like, oh, like I conscientiously do this, or I conscientiously don't do this to make it better?
I try to use more direct language, I think. less subtle and more direct language, I think, would be my experience. Because it's, English is a very difficult language with a lot of intricacies and subtleties. So when going through a translator, I try to limit those and be very direct and clear in my terms, which I think sometimes comes off a little bit more harsh because you're just being more to the facts, right? Than using, like, every language has intricacies, right? There's 5 ways to say the same thing in every language, right? But when I have to use a translator, that I use the most basic and sometimes direct and less subtle way, which is not my usual way of speaking. That's really all I got at this.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
I'm stretching here.
And I'll circle back to another point that you mentioned earlier where you said, everyone comes into an encounter with their own existing biases and that you have your own and someone else might have their own. And you mentioned the idea that there might be some disparities or differences in goals that a patient presents to an encounter with. Do you have an example in mind where, you came into it with like an idea that this is what your treatment recommendation was going to be and the patient was just like coming to it from a very different place?
I have many examples.
Share one.
It's a common one. I'm sure you've seen these too. A relatively young person, 40s or 50s, with a relatively small breast cancer comes in post lumpectomy, and I want no other treatment whatsoever. Standard of care for this cancer would definitely be radiation, and because of their biases being different than my biases, I feel it's warranted for them to have adjuvant radiotherapy, and they feel it's not. So there's a discussion there about why I think there is. There's an indication for this. There's discussion from them saying why they think there isn't. And then sometimes it's a little frustrating when they say no, but I don't know. I tend not to get too worked up about it. We all have to everybody makes the best decision for themselves at the time based on what they feel and what they think. So I try not to lose a lot of sleep or get very mad about it because, for this person at this time, this is what they want. I make my pitch. I make sure they know why. I may try to be very clear about why I think this is best for them. And then, I don't know. I know we all have times where we're frustrated when people don't choose treatment, but
yeah, I
don't know. I try not to let it get hung. I know you and I have had similar conversations before, right? They're young. This is curable, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know why I don't know why I don't get that hung up about it. Maybe I should. I don't know.
No, but I mean, that's clearly a strategy that you employ, right? Is trying to distance the decision from your regard of the person.
I guess that makes me come off as a little bit uncaring, but I am caring. In fact, I think I'm respecting their wishes, even though I disagree with their wishes. Yeah. And 100 people in the same situation would make 100 different decisions, right? So I'm like, hey, this is just data. I don't know, like 100 people have the same situation, you get 100 different responses, right? So you're just one of those responses, and as long as I feel they are adequately informed, I let them choose their path.
For sure. So now I want you to reflect on whether you've ever come across, as a trainee, for instance, an encounter where another person, a staff, somebody, engaged in an encounter with a patient where either dichotomously, they did it very, very well, where they really employed the recognition of these domains, or where they did it really poorly, and it sort of stood out to you where you're like, oh, they really didn't, respect this person's lived experience, or they didn't engage appropriately, or like those sorts of things. So either something that was done really well or something that was done really poorly.
Okay, I will give you a poorly example.
Mm-hmm.
This comes to my mind. again, I have quite an extensive research background. So one of the things I get not hung up with, it's one of the things that's very important to me when it comes to research is informed consent.
Mm-hmm.
And I have witnessed staff members have conversations about research and about enrollment that I would not deem to be informed consent, or would not be, I would deem to be unpressured or unpressured and independent enrollment in a study. So I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, but I've seen people try to recruit or try to engage people in research in what I would deem to be a way that does not respect their autonomy or their choices or their experiences, as you've mentioned.
Can you be very specific, like an example that stands out, and like, again, knowing that this will be anonymized, identifiers won't be carried forward?
I'll try to give you broad strokes without throwing anybody under the bus. And
I would much prefer you gave me much smaller strokes, to be honest.
I know. I just don't. I want to respect the autonomy and the experiences of the researcher as well. I had briefly spoken to somebody about enrollment in a trial, and mm-hmm. they had told me that they were not interested. Mm-hmm. And then the staff had come in and made a much stronger pitch for the trial. Why don't you want to be involved? Why this will help you? Don't you understand? That sort of thing. Mm-hmm. In a very strong sort of manner for involvement in this trial, which in my opinion, I did not feel very comfortable with, mm-hmm. both as Craig the researcher, as Craig the physician, and just mm-hmm. as Craig the Craig, right? But, as a, junior trainee, you fly in the wall. And when the patient ultimately declined again, I was like, okay, good, good choice. Yeah, go on.
No, I was just going to say, like, during that encounter where, say, the staff was being a lot more pressuring in terms of this person's decision, were there things that they were disregarding that, like, you had already engaged this person in conversation about, where they had shared, like, these are my reasons, like, this is my worry, this is why I don't want to do it, and that the, like, staff glossed over?
I'd say just if I remember correctly, the person had said to me, I don't feel comfortable usually enrolling in clinical trials. I prefer standard of care. Just kind of summarizing what they've said. And I had articulated that to the staff and the person, mm-hmm. and that was what they, so I don't think it was anything like I have the person who was trying to be enrolled didn't say, oh, I have a mistrust in the system, didn't articulate any particular reason. Yeah. Simply, I don't feel comfortable being a part of clinical trials.
Which is completely valid.
And I didn't explore that anymore. Again, my research background, somebody says, no, I don't push. Maybe that's my own bias. That's the way I do research. Someone mm-hmm. says, no, we don't push, right? So there you go. There's my own bias. And yeah, I felt that conversation was not the way that I like to do research. How about that? Absolutely.
Fair. And then was there sort of a debrief that you had with the patient afterwards? Like, was there any follow-up conversation that resulted as a result of it, or you were just sort of left with an ick feeling?
Yeah, that's what I would say. It was just a little bit of a, I don't know, anytime I get this ick feeling, I remember and say, okay, you know what, when I grow up, I'm not going to practice like that. Right. Yeah. So that's, unfortunately, as a trainee, I think that's sometimes the best we can do, is just say, I will be better.
Yeah, for sure. Now, thinking back to your training, have you ever in your training as a rad onc or through med school received any formal or informal teaching or training within the domains of equity, diversity, and inclusivity as it relates to your role?
So, yes, a little. And I would say that, it mostly, well, no, in medical school in Calgary, We did have some seminars about patient engagement with First Nations community. Calgary has a large First Nations and Indigenous population, so we did have sessions about engaging with them. With people from that background. Honestly, I don't remember much more than that. I think I received some experience, some training during college. This is going back a long time. When I was studying in college for paramedic, I took a course on not social determinants of health, but like different cultural approaches to healthcare and things like that. But that was an elective. That was just something I sought out for myself. So that wasn't official training. I don't know, man. Residency is a blur of Wednesday seminars run by PGME sometimes, right?
But nothing that stands out in like rad-onc.
One sec. Oh, sorry. There's just a code, but it wasn't here.
Nothing that stands out in rad-onc training. You're allowed to say no.
No, Dr. Strang does encourage us to attend seminars about inclusivity for Indigenous and First Nations populations. So Dr. Strang has encouraged us on multiple occasions to attend seminars for that, and we do attend those. That would be the extent of it, that I would say.
So like nothing formally built into your curricula?
Oh my God, no. Like within our, no.
Training?
So we do as part of our training, we do a community elective where you could be exposed to different populations of people, but it's rad-onc. So a community elective is, Oshawa. Like it's not the middle of nowhere, right? We have to be where linear accelerators are. In medical school, I did a global health elective where I lived and worked in Trinidad for a month. That was my own choice. I sought that out. It was a good time.
Well, I guess let's explore that a little bit further. So you've mentioned twice now, when you were doing your training for paramedicine and then in an elective that you sought out these experiences, that they weren't expected of you, that you weren't dictated to do them. What prompted you to seek them out if it wasn't an expectation?
Trying to articulate this. You and I both grew up in Scarborough, multicultural area. I like to see the lenses with which other people view healthcare from, because I like to, when I'm having a conversation with somebody about their care, I like to know where they're coming from a little bit, because I know even us as physicians, when we talk with physicians, we sometimes don't put all our cards on the table. So if I can understand a little bit where someone's coming from, I can try to approach some of their preconceived notions about healthcare proactively. If you know what, I don't know. I like to understand where people are coming from when they make their decisions and how they approach healthcare. So I found those two experiences that I sought out to help me a little bit with that.
So I know that you mentioned that, like, again, college, you had sought out this opportunity of your own right to again, bridge that gap, see where people come from. When was the first time that you can remember, either in your training or in life, that you were exposed to these ideas of like diversity and inclusion and equitable care, or like equity in peoples? When was the first time you remember engaging in those ideas?
Like a million years ago when I was a paramedic, just because I would see people who would have no family physician, they would have no access to healthcare, and 911 was their healthcare, right? And that's not because they didn't know any better. That's not because they were dumb or they were poor, or it's just because they, they, for whatever reason, they did not have equity and access to healthcare. So as, first responders, sometimes I was their only access to any sort of medical care. And I don't know, I found that newer Canadians tended to experience this more for whatever reason.
And was having to face that potentially for the first time hard, or was it fairly comfortable? Was that something that, forced you to reflect in your own time? Like, did it evoke any sort of emotion after the fact?
It was a bit of a paradigm shift, or no, maybe not paradigm shift. I'll write that down. It just kind of made me self-reflect, or made me introspect, because you got to remember, I was like 20, right? When I was a paramedic. Boys mature slower than girls. I think that's pretty much a universal standard. So the first time I came to understand, oh wow, you mean you don't have a family doctor? I've had a family doctor since I could remember, right? So that was the first time it made me kind of look inside about my own bias. Well, I don't know about biases, but I guess it's bias, but look inside about how my experience with growing up in healthcare in Toronto would be different than other people's experience with healthcare in Toronto. So that was just my first experience with that.
No, that's fair. And so in reflection, so this is the next question, in reflection, would you say that this is something that you are comfortable with, not comfortable with? And are there any learning curves that you have for yourself that, you kind of want to get better at as you go forward in your training and career?
Can you give me that one more time?
So are these domains, so EDI specifically, are these domains something that you're comfortable with as it relates to your role in radiation oncology? Or yes or no, or to what extent? And then are there any aspects of it that you want to see yourself continue to get better at?
Okay. So am I good at it? Do I feel comfortable with it? It's a work in progress. This is a lifelong learning thing, right? I think even healthcare teaching and healthcare experience around this topic is evolving, right? As we've said, I'm old. I've been in healthcare for 20 years now, right? I started, working and I can see even now a shift in the way healthcare providers are trained, even basically, being in medical school. And when did I start medical school? 2014. And now seeing the training that medical students go through now regarding these EDI topics, I think the role for that is expanding. In terms of my own learning and growth, right, I think this is an ongoing process. I need to continue to be open and to learn. And I don't know, I always like to hear, I don't know, every time someone says they don't want radiation or they don't want cancer therapy, I try to figure out where they're coming from and why, and then I file that away into my, okay, this is a particular reason why someone didn't like this. And I think some of that does have to do with EDI, and I try to catalog those for myself. What else? What else do you want? What else are you looking for?
No, it's just like, is there any skill set particularly that you're hoping to develop as you go forward? Anything that, you flagged in yourself as like, oh, I want to do this better. I want to be better at this.
I want to continue to improve in my ability to understand where people are coming from when they make healthcare decisions, just based on their own biases, be it personal, experiential, or cultural. Yeah. That's where I want to continue to grow and just try to understand where people are coming from when they make decisions.
Yeah,
that's the best I can
do. So this is a very much about you question. So have you ever been in a situation where you were directly affected by gaps in another person's understanding or willingness to engage in the domains of EDI as it related to you, either professionally or personally, right? Where someone didn't respect your personhood, didn't explore something about you, or like assumed things about you that weren't true.
Can you rephrase that a little bit?
So, because I mean, the classic, the tokenistic example that comes to mind is like, if you were a BIPOC person, were you ever not like necessarily discriminated against, but like, were you put in a situation where things didn't acknowledge the fact that you are a BIPOC person? Or if you are a woman, like, did that happen? It's like, are there any domains about your self-identity that someone once didn't respect and that affected you professionally or personally?
Yeah, I don't think so. No. I suppose that I've lived a bit of a privileged life, and that I don't think I've ever personally experienced any sort of discrimination or misidentification or anything in those sort of realms that have impacted me personally or professionally that I can encounter, that I can recall. And I appreciate that makes me come from a bit of a privileged place.
Yeah, no, and that's valid, right? Like, if you don't have a lived experience, you don't have a lived experience, and that's totally fine. And so the last question that I have for you is there anything else that you want said or shared as it relates to the research topic, which is understanding how oncologists learn and, understand the domains of EDI in oncology?
Yeah, so I have my own personal bias, so I will allow a little bit of that to come in. I don't find that lectures do very much. We can talk all day about, people from this area tend to reflect on this topic from this, and I think as healthcare trainees, often we are bombarded with lecture topics. We are constantly taught things, about 10% of it sticks, and I'm getting to the point personally in my training where it's like, okay, if this is not Royal College testable, I am not paying attention. So I think lived in experiences or firsthand experiences do a lot more, or are a lot more impactful than reading or having a lecture about that. Now, we all have our own learning styles. So maybe for some people, having a lecture or reading a paper about a topic is more useful for them. But for me, I find firsthand experience being the best teacher about EDI topics.
So knowing that if it needed to be implemented into curricula or training in a way that like reached everyone so that it wasn't just like, well, maybe you'll experience this, how would you see it integrated into training?
I'm a big fan of electives or rotations in underserviced communities, that sort of thing. So, for example, northern communities with less access to healthcare, or areas of cities which have decreased socioeconomic status, who have unequal access to physicians. And I think those sort of experiences, those sort of rotations are very powerful and useful for learning the topics of EDI. I don't think this is something that can be incorporated into radiation oncology, unfortunately, because the nature of the specialty is, we're in bigger centers. You go to Sudbury, okay, that's great. So you're going to see, it's not like we can go to a very small area and do a rotation. I think this is something that needs to be approached before residency. I think this is part of the curriculum, and it needs to be implemented into medical school, sort of thing. And to be fair, I did do one rotation in a small community.
Mm-hmm.
But, I don't know that that was the most impactful sort of experience. So I think we need to go, again, I can only speak about Radon, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think in medical school, I think is where we need to address learning and experiences in EDI topics.
Fair. Yeah. So earlier, like make it mainstream, pipeline it early on in the curricula, normalize it, and don't tokenize it kind of thing later on.
Yeah. Again, that's only looking at Radon. I know, this might be easier to do in other specialties like family,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, or surgery or something like that. But like in Radon, man, we need bunkers, we need photons, we need electrons, right? Those don't get put up everywhere.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's totally fair. All right. With that, I'm going to stop the recording in the triplicate that it's happening in. Give me 2 quick seconds. Stop.